Welcome back and thank you for staying with us. You're still watching NTV Weekend Edition. Now, hearing loss has often been referred to as an invisible disability, not just because of the lack of the visible symptoms, but because it has long been stigmatized in communities and ignored by policymakers. Now, here are some facts about this condition. Globally, over 80% of ear and hearing care needs remain unmet. Now, unaddressed hearing loss poses an annual cost of nearly $1 trillion globally, and deeply ingrained societal perceptions and stigmatizing mindsets are the key factors that limit efforts for preventing and addressing hearing loss. Now, to share more in this regard, we do have Dr. Cedric Masiko, an ear, nose and throat specialist. Good evening and welcome to Talk of the Nation.
Good evening, Mildred, and thanks for having me on the show.
Doctor, let's just start with the basic of understanding what hearing loss means.
Hearing loss is the reduction, which can either be complete or partial, in your ability to transduce an auditory stimulus into something that you make sense out of. An auditory stimulus is a conversation, so your ability to perceive sound. Hearing is a sense. So your loss of either partial or complete in your ability to transduce sound is what we refer to as hearing loss.
And you can either be born with this condition or actually get affected.
Correct.
Okay.
It's either congenital or acquired. So you're either born with it or you acquire it either earlier on in life or as you age. Actually, the most common cause of hearing loss world over is presbycusis, which is age-induced hearing loss. We lose our sense of hearing as we grow older. That contributes to the highest percentage of hearing
So
loss.
now, on a regular working day, what are the regular scenarios that you see among some of your patients that ultimately lead to hearing impairment in Uganda?
We still have different, so we look at it in the different age strata, where we look at the pediatric population, the younger children, where the most common cause of hearing loss is otitis media with an effusion. Then in the older citizens, there is age-related hearing loss or presbycusis. But also what is coming up much more commonly is occupational hearing loss or recreational hearing loss, and this is noise. This is induced by noise, and this is seen in people who have careers in places that have sound that is louder than what is actually recommended.
Also, how about those that, you know, their line of work requires them to have, you know, headphones almost for the entire day? What can they do?
So luckily enough, for most of the places where there's an occupational exposure to noise, excessive noise, which is in the excess of 85 decibels for an 8-hour working shift, we have a mandatory pre-recruitment hearing screening, so that before you work with us, we know your level of hearing. Then as you participate in employment in such a workplace, it is mandatory that we have a hearing screening for you annually, so that we can identify those that are at risk of losing their hearing as they participate in these jobs they do.
Okay, so talk to us, Doctor, about the initiatives and programs that are being implemented in Uganda to promote the ear and hearing care, especially in the underserved communities.
There are several programs and initiatives going on as we speak, most of them by government, but also some by the private sector. So for the underserved communities, the biggest program we have currently going on is the quality controlled neonatal hearing screening, which is a multi-center pilot study that seeks to perform hearing screening tests for newborns as they exit the hospital. So it is targeting regional referrals, that is Masaka, Kawempe, Gulu, and also Mukono General Hospital. So in the immunization in the immunization centers, they do hearing screening tests to be able to identify children who are born without hearing, so that the problem is identified way earlier before they manifest in school as people who do not hear.
Well, just to take you back a little bit, what has been the state of affairs when it comes to, you know, accessing the ear and hearing care services in the country? How has these services, how have they been functioning? Have they been there? The knowledge about it, is it amongst the people? Kindly enlighten us on that.
Ear and hearing care is mostly available in the regional referral hospitals, but from way back we've had the service at the National Referral Hospital and some private facilities where we have ear, nose and throat care, and this has now gone on to the regional referrals. Some, though some have not yet gotten the ENT, because those are the areas where patients or the people who complain about inability to hear will report to first. However, those seem to catch the worst, the bad problems. So that is why we have to celebrate this World Hearing Day, which is tomorrow, as a way of creating awareness that something can be done and this can be identified way earlier.
Okay, so how does then the lack of awareness contribute to the prevalence of the ear and hearing loss problem in the country?
Lack of awareness would be, I'll give you an example. When you look at small scale metal fabricators, they work in loud environments, but none of them have usage of hearing protective devices, and neither do they know the presentation of hearing loss, because it creeps upon you as you get exposed over time. So exposure would cause you to get a transient hearing loss that will present as something as a ringing sound in your ear, or your inability to perceive a conversation in a loud environment initially. So by the time you realize that, well, I have a hearing loss, which is measurable, irreparable damage has been made. So what we are saying is, look, we need to have hearing screening for all the people that are exposed to noise. And by doing that, would have to prevent these people from getting to that level where they get the irreparable damage. Okay,
and so then what steps are you taking to increase the ear and hearing awareness?
So the steps that are being taken are by both government and the private sector, where we look at especially the training institutions and the universities in conducting research, where we have, for example, a study that was conducted amongst traffic police officers in Kampala metropolitan area. As they control traffic, they are exposed to a lot of noise that is generated by whistle blowing, the horns, the sirens, the car engines. So in conducting research to find the amount of the problem, in so doing you create awareness for this problem, which is silent, like you initially told us.
Okay.
But not only that, there are other programs, for example, in the private sector, where we have the different factories. For example, the steel manufacturing factories that have partnered with private players who do annual screening tests for their workers that are exposed to noise. So in so doing, we identify earlier on, but also provide treatment and give advice on who should be exposed to less noise.
Okay, so then hearing loss can impact the quality of a life of a person, and this also includes the education and employment. And so I'd like you to enlighten us on how big of an impact this can be, especially on the life of somebody in regards to education and employment?
With hearing loss, you have inability to conduct or participate in a social conversation, which will lead to self-isolation. So that will lead to, one, failed relationships, that's at work, but also at home. Then you have people who are burdened to say, pardon me, all the time. So what this leads to is a reduction in activity or self-isolation from what would be their social interactions or their participation at work.
Okay.
And we tend to give them less roles as they are they are unable to.
Okay, so finally, what would be the remedies, one or two, as we get to close this conversation?
So the remedy for hearing loss would be, especially in our low resource setting, would be prevention. And for prevention, would look at it, one, for the newborns, would look at early screening to identify, but also encouraging proper attendance of antenatal and delivery in hands of a skilled birth attendant, for you to get a non-eventful delivery, because that protects the child from exposure to hearing loss.
All right. Thank you, Dr. Cedric Masiko, for making time to speak to us. He is an ear, nose and throat specialist, getting to share in on us what the World Hearing Day means and what we will be commemorating come March 3rd, 2020.